Hello. We're excited to show you our native speech capabilities. In the early years of the 19th century, the United States lived with an illusion. It was the illusion of safety, of distance, of destiny. Oceans, people believed, were natural walls. Freedom, they believed, was permanent once claimed. In Washington City, a capital carved out of swamps and ambition, men spoke confidently of the future, while quietly fearing the past they could not escape. The Republic was young, proud, and fragile, though few were willing to admit it aloud. Great Britain had not forgotten its lost colonies. To the British Empire, the United States was not a rising power, but a former possession that had grown unruly. For years, Britain interfered with American trade, seized American ships, and forced American sailors into British service. Each insult cut deep, reopening wounds left by the Revolution. When war finally came in 1812, many Americans believed it would be quick, even glorious. They believed the British Empire was too distracted, too tired, too distant to fight seriously. They were wrong. For 2 long years, the war dragged on with no clear victor. Battles were won and lost on both sides, but nothing decisive ever came. Then, in Europe, Napoleon fell. The sound of cannons faded across the continent, and suddenly Britain was free. Free to remember, free to retaliate, free to turn its full, terrifying attention westward. By 1814, British ships filled the Atlantic like dark shadows moving with purpose. Along the American coastline, towns burned, ports were blockaded. The war no longer felt distant. It felt close, personal, and unavoidable. Still, in Washington, denial remained strong. The capital was not New York or Boston. It was not rich, not strategic, not worth the effort. That belief would become its greatest weakness. Washington City was unfinished, almost embarrassed by its own existence. The Capitol stood incomplete, its chambers echoing with empty promises. The president's house was elegant but vulnerable, surrounded by open land and silence. There were no great walls, no strong forts, no serious army stationed to protect the heart of the nation. America trusted hope more than preparation. As British forces landed quietly in Maryland, word traveled slowly and badly. Messages arrived late, orders contradicted each other. President James Madison, burdened by doubt and exhaustion, struggled to act decisively. The militia gathered to defend the capital was a reflection of the nation itself, brave in spirit, weak in structure. Farmers, clerks, and laborers stood shoulder to shoulder with muskets they barely knew how to fire, led by officers who had never faced a professional army. On August 24, 1814, the illusion finally shattered. At Bladensburg, under the heavy summer sun, American forces waited nervously. Sweat soaked their uniforms, fear tightened their throats. When British troops advanced, calm and relentless, something inside the American lines broke almost instantly. Smoke filled the air. Orders were shouted, then lost. Men fired wildly, then turned and ran. Discipline collapsed into panic. Pride collapsed into survival. The defense of the capital ended not with heroism, but with fear. The road to Washington lay unguarded. As the sun began to set, British soldiers marched toward the city with steady footsteps. There was no resistance, no final stand, just silence and disbelief. Citizens watched from windows and doorways as the enemy entered their capital. Some cried, some prayed, some packed what little they could carry and fled into the darkness. President Madison had already escaped. Government officials followed, abandoning their offices, their papers, their dignity. Washington City was left behind like a wounded animal, waiting for the blow it knew was coming. Inside the president's house, Dolly Madison moved with desperate purpose. She knew the danger, she could smell it in the air, feel it closing in. Yet she refused to leave immediately. History mattered to her, symbols mattered. The portrait of George Washington hung silently on the wall, watching as chaos unfolded. It was more than paint and canvas, it was memory, it was identity. With time running out, she ordered it removed, knowing there would be no second chance. When British troops arrived, night had fully fallen. Torches flickered, commands were issued coldly. Fire was not an accident, it was intentional. Room by room, the president's house was consumed. Flames climbed the walls, devouring furniture, letters, and dreams. Smoke poured into the sky, carrying the scent of defeat. The Capitol followed, its unfinished halls burning like an open wound, the seat of American law collapsing into ash before it had ever fully formed. Across the city, government buildings ignited one by one. The glow of fire reflected in the eyes of those who watched from afar, unable to help, unable to believe. Washington was not merely attacked, it was humiliated. The world's newest republic stood exposed, stripped of its confidence in a single night. For the British, the destruction was both punishment and message. This is what happens when empires are challenged. This is what happens when rebellion forgets its place. Morning did not bring relief to Washington. It brought shame. As the sun rose over the ruined city, smoke still drifted through the air like a lingering ghost. The streets were silent, not because peace had returned, but because there was nothing left to say. The capital of the United States looked less like the heart of a nation and more like the remains of a failed dream. Charred walls stood hollow, roofs had collapsed inward, and the symbols of government lay broken, exposed, and humiliated. People slowly returned from the countryside where they had fled the night before. They walked carefully, stepping through ash and shattered glass, afraid of what they might recognize. Some searched for homes that no longer existed. Others stood frozen in place, staring at ruins, unable to connect memory with reality. This was Washington, they told themselves. This was not supposed to happen here. Inside the burned shell of the president's house, blackened walls whispered of what had been lost. Furniture lay in pieces, important documents were gone, personal belongings were reduced to soot. The building still stood, but it was empty, violated, and stripped of dignity. It looked like a body without a soul. Many wondered if the nation felt the same way. News of the destruction spread quickly across the country. In towns and villages, people gathered to hear the reports, struggling to understand how a foreign army had walked into the capital and burned it without resistance. For some, the news felt like betrayal. For others, it felt like destiny finally demanding its price. The young republic had believed too much in its own story and too little in the reality of power. President James Madison returned to a city that barely resembled the one he had left. The weight of failure sat heavily on him. He was not greeted as a hero or even as a leader, but as a man forced to face the consequences of weakness. Critics blamed him for poor preparation, for hesitation, for trusting that war would never reach this far. Madison himself carried a deeper burden. He had watched the Capitol burn from a distance, knowing that his presence could not have stopped it. The question facing the nation was simple and terrifying. If the Capitol could fall so easily, what could truly protect the United States? Fear did not fade with the smoke. It settled in. British forces were still nearby. Baltimore was next, many believed, perhaps New York, perhaps the entire eastern coast. The idea of American independence began to feel fragile again, as if the revolution had never truly ended, only paused. Old wounds reopened, old doubts returned. Yet beneath the fear, something else began to grow. Anger, determination, a quiet refusal to disappear. In the ruins of Washington, rebuilding began almost immediately, though not everyone agreed it should. Some argued the capital should be moved to a safer location. Others believed the city was cursed, a symbol of failure that should be abandoned. But to leave would mean admitting defeat, not just to Britain, but to history itself. Rebuilding Washington became an act of defiance. Workers cleared debris from the streets, stones were lifted, walls were examined. Every blackened brick became a reminder not only of destruction, but of survival. The decision was made to restore the president's house. To cover the burn marks, its walls were painted white, an attempt to erase the scars, while quietly acknowledging they had once been there. The building would stand again, not untouched, but transformed. While Washington rebuilt, the war continued. British commanders, frustrated by the storm and the limited strategic value of the burned capital, shifted their focus. Baltimore was their next target. Unlike Washington, Baltimore was ready. Its defenses were strong. Its people were prepared. When British ships attacked Fort McHenry, they were met with relentless fire. Through the night, bombs burst in the sky, lighting the darkness with violence. When dawn arrived and the American flag was still flying, it became more than a military victory. It became a psychological one.
After Washington's humiliation, the nation needed proof that it could still stand. That proof came wrapped in smoke and cannon fire. From that night would come words that later became the national anthem, born not from confidence, but from survival. Slowly, the balance began to shift. Peace negotiations resumed. Both sides were exhausted. Britain had made its point, but it had not broken the United States. America had been wounded, but it had not surrendered. When the Treaty of Ghent was signed in December of 1814, the war ended without clear winners or losers. Borders returned to where they had been before the fighting began. On paper, little had changed, but in reality, everything had. The burning of Washington carved a permanent scar into the American memory. It exposed the nation's weakness in the most brutal way possible. No speech could hide it. No victory could erase it. The illusion of invulnerability was gone forever. In its place stood a harsher understanding of the world. Freedom was not guaranteed, independence was not permanent, and survival required preparation. The military was re-examined, defenses were strengthened, forts were built, lessons were written in blood and ash. The nation began to take itself seriously, not as an idea, but as a power that could be tested and broken if it remained careless. Washington was no longer just a symbol of hope, it was a warning. For the people who had lived through that night, the memory never faded. They remembered the glow of flames against the sky, the sound of distant boots, the feeling of helplessness as their government collapsed around them. Some carried that memory quietly, others spoke of it with bitterness. All of them were changed. Years passed, new generations grew up walking streets rebuilt from ruins. They saw the White House standing tall, the Capitol restored, stronger and larger than before. Few of them knew the full story. Fewer still understood how close the nation had come to losing itself. History softened the edges, turning disaster into legend, pain into footnotes. But the truth remained buried beneath the paint and stone. The United States had stared into the darkness and survived, not because it was powerful, but because it refused to disappear. The burning of Washington did not end the American experiment, it tested it. And in that test, the nation learned a lesson it would never forget. Strength is not proven in moments of victory, but in the long, painful process of rebuilding after humiliation. Yet even as the Capitol rose again, another truth lingered quietly in the background. Survival had come at a cost. Confidence was replaced by caution. Innocence was replaced by memory. The United States moved forward, but it carried the shadow of that night with it. A reminder that the world could still reach into its heart and set it on fire.